What role do you think that the fact that the dollar is no longer backed by gold, what
Yeah,
role does it play in in this transition
yeah,
from the dollar from to another reserve currency? Because if
yeah,
we analyze the history, the previous reserve currencies, the sterling pound, the Dutch guilder, they were all backed by gold or silver. So the
yeah.
money proper was the commodity, not the paper. Now it's different. We no longer have this backing. It seems to me that it's even more difficult now to get rid of the dollar standard.
Yeah, so I think part of the reason I think this is so interesting is I don't disagree with what you just said. The last couple global reserve currencies, including the US dollar, at least for a time,
Yep.
had gold as either partial or full backing. And I think throughout history, there's many times that gold or some other hard commodity was money. But there was often many times throughout history where money was just whatever the king or the governor or the local warlord said it was. And you can actually, and there's this theory that money developed out of barter. If you had a cow and you needed a pair of shoes, you had to walk around with your cow until you found a shoemaker and you'd give him a cow and he'd give you 10 pair of shoes or whatever it is. And I'm sure that type of barter economy happened a little bit and at certain times, but there's actually very, very little historical evidence that ever happened. But there's actually a lot of evidence that says this king or that governor or that so-and-so demanded X amount of wheat or X amount of corn or whatever it was at the end of the season. And so everybody knew that you had to pay your taxes and that thing, whatever that thing was. And so then that kind of became money that everybody exchanged because everybody knew they needed that because they had to pay the king or the governor at the end of the tax season. And so there's an argument that that's how money developed, was what was the most commonly used good in order to satisfy the king. And so I think there's a little bit of recency bias with gold being money. Now, having said that, I actually think if the free market were to choose what would become money, I think the free market would choose gold. I actually think it's the best form of money for several reasons, or it's the best thing to back a token that would be used as money.
Mm-hmm.
And for several reasons. I don't know if we have time to go into all of them now, but
Yep.
just because it's the best form of money doesn't mean it's going to be the chosen form of money, right? I mean, you could argue that democracy is the best form of government. Now, whether it is or not, I think that's open for debate, but you could make that argument. But just because democracy is the best form of government, you look around the world, there's a lot of places that are not democracies. So just because something should be some way doesn't mean it's going to be that way, right? And I think that for many reasons, mainly because they don't like to have handcuffs put on them, but governments don't like gold as money because it makes them be fiscally conservative. It makes them keep their promises. It makes them, it makes it harder for them to spend money and, get votes, basically. And to a certain extent, it's hard to have a growing economy with gold. You could argue that there's it makes the expansion of the money supply less, so the
Mm-hmm.
rate of growth slows down. Now, the good thing about that is it keeps inflation in check. The bad thing is it potentially also keeps growth in check. So anyway, there's a number of pros and cons. I happen to think that the pros on gold outweigh the cons. And I think from a citizen's point of view, the gold would be a great asset to have backing currency. If I was a government and I wanted to have flexibility, I probably wouldn't choose that. And I think that's why they don't. And so I think the reason that central banks around the world and governments around the world hold gold and why dictators hold gold is they know that sometimes people don't listen to them or people lose confidence in them. And at some point, the free markets overpower whatever diktats the government have said. And I think in many ways, governments hold gold for the same reason that you and I and other people do. It's kind of as an insurance policy, because if the system we design collapses, gold will put itself forward as a worthy replacement, right? And so when I have this comment about the dollar being the best currency, often people will say, well, gold is better than the dollar. Again, I don't necessarily disagree with that, but I disagree that the governments are just going to stand back and let it happen. They may be forced to do it in order to regain confidence or whatever it is, or as a last-ditch effort, to underpin the failing economy. But I don't think that they want to do it.